If your brand belongs in the heart of the yachting world, this is where it happens. Yachting International Radio reaches over 1 million yachting professionals and enthusiasts every month, with 77 million impressions, 220,000 social followers, and 74,000 podcast subscribers. Our hosts are insiders, crew, captains, CEOs, trusted voices shaping the industry. This is targeted, high-impact advertising in a luxury niche. Visit yachtinginternationalradio.com/advertise. Your audience is already listening.
Welcome to this episode of Wild Pals Tales from Superyacht Laundry. Today, I'm digging into, but it's kind of a bit weird because you're like an old friend. Well, we're not old, but like you're a friend. We've known a very long time. The gorgeous, the fabulous Rhea. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. I am old, so I will on that.
I didn't really think about that, did I? Before we have known each other, I don't know, quite a time now, haven't we? I've always, actually, we can go all the way back to, it was Catalina Heights, wasn't it? Catalina Nights? Didn't you do, so this is like.
It was back in 2014.
Yes, that was when I met that was the time when I had met Tim and we dressed up as winches and knights and we went round Palma getting drunk. That was an interesting night. Sure. Got some really interesting.
I had many of them. I had many. They were great fun.
So yeah, we've known each other quite some time now in various different things, but we've seen the most recent with you working or owning, founding, creating Yachting International Radio. But before we talk about that, let's go back into the mists of time. What was Rhea doing in Canada? And then how did she end up in Mallorca? And then, to fill in the blanks, like, where did you come from?
Well, I grew up in a logging yard in northern British Columbia, Canada, and we spent a lot of time in remote logging camps. And literally, I was in a logging yard. Right across from my house was the big hanger size shop where they used to fix the logging trucks and the backhoes and the cats. And
Wow.
There was a lot of equipment around. I think at one point my father owned 15 logging trucks.
Absolutely stunning as well. Like, I remember when I traveled Canada, one of the jobs you could do is go plant trees in the woods. Like it looked really hard though. And I was a bit.
One thing I can say about British Columbia is that pretty much any job that you have is hard graft. I mean, the Canadians are known as a tougher people simply because in order to survive, you just have to be tougher.
It's a wild country,
Yeah.
It's not very forgiving. The winters aren't very forgiving.
No, I hate winter, so not looking forward to going back.
So you grew up in BC. Were you always destined to work in media, obviously? Were you just desperate to communicate with anybody who wasn't in a logging yard?
Well, no, basically, I should have grew up in a really religious household. And my father was sort of the school of thought that women were to be seen and not heard, as well as children were to be seen and not heard. I was expected to marry well and to have 2.5 kids, live in suburbia, and cook dinner for my husband every night. And unfortunately, I'm really shit at cooking. And
the seen and not heard about obviously probably was a struggle for you as well.
Sorry?
I said the seen and not heard bit was probably a struggle from the start.
Well, I remember even as a little kid, and I got smacked for it because it was still in the days of corporal punishment, right? If it was today's day and age, I'm sure CPS or whatever would be at my parents' door. But if people were ignoring me, I'd be, 4 years old, and there'd be like a room full of adults because my parents were very social people. And if somebody ignored me, I'd literally stomp on their foot to get their attention. So yeah, keeping me quiet was a bit difficult. And my father forever struggled with that, for sure. And I think that was sort of the basis of what led me to media, because I felt that I had something to say and I was smarter than my brother, which wasn't hard to do, honestly. But my father was always grooming him to take over the logging company. And ironically enough, most of the men of the logging company assumed that I would take over because I had the balls and my brother didn't. But when it came down to it, I was still expected to be barefoot and pregnant and looking after my husband at some stage. So I think that's really when I made the decision to go into media, because my voice had been ignored. Even some of the best advice that I'd ever given my father was ignored. And I thought, no, there's so many people out there whose voices are being ignored that really do have something to say that should be heard. And no one's giving them the opportunity. What a better world this would be if all of these people went out there and had their voices heard. And so that's sort of what led me towards media, I guess.
It is quite crazy if you think about, I'm a firm believer in fate. Even when you go back to your childhood, you can kind of see the pattern of where you ended up, where your character was taking you, your environment was taking you. So what happened? So you went to school, did media, or did you end up pregnant? Or both?
I left home at 15 and I finished school while working full time to support myself. And then I went on to college and I got my business administration. And while I was doing business administration, I started working at a newspaper locally. And the newspaper job was they were affiliated with the radio station. And that's where that connection sort of came. I liked working at the newspaper, but I really loved the idea of radio. And so I ended up working at the newspaper for, I don't know how many years, but by the time I was 23, I was working at radio that was in Terrace, BC. And then I moved to Penticton, BC, and I was working in radio at that stage.
What was the attraction to radio from it? Obviously it's the written word, but what do you think was what it was about radio that kind of resonated with you more?
Well, in that day and age, it was before social media and before the internet even. And I think what really drew it to me was that you could actually reach people. It was a way of reaching people. With newspaper, they would have to sit down and read it. But so many more people would, the days of, the portable radio and whatever else. And the people would listen to it in the cars and you could, impart the news on the morning drive to school or, at noon or the afternoon drive time, evening drive time. It was a method of delivering something. Honestly, with newspaper, you could go through and edit again and again. And at that time, radio was live and there was no editing. You said your piece and you answered questions and there was no going back and fixing it. So you knew that what you were hearing over the radio was, whether it be somebody's opinion, somebody's delusion, or news. You knew that it was what was happening at that time, and what came out of that person's mouth was what came out of that person's mouth.
I think I've not really thought about it before, but was that when radio came about, that instant change, that instant way to kind of access a lot of people live. Obviously that was before TV. TV obviously came afterwards, but from a news perspective, obviously that was quite. That we haven't seen a bigger change until obviously internet and Twitter and Telegram. Do you know what I mean? We're now going through the second probably phase of that instant reaction, instant news, which is all changed.
Radio was the first time I think that anybody could actually reach into your home and become part of it.
Yeah.
People would sit around their radio every night for whole families to listen to shows. I mean, wasn't it Orson Welles that had that big, he had everybody in England believing that the sky was falling, right? And then we, of course, had pirate radio. It was so many amazing points in history were created through radio. And it was the first time that people on one side of the country could hear about what was happening on the other side of the country. Or it was the first time that a leader of the country could advise people on, a lot of the time through radio, it was during wartime too.
Yes.
So it was a way of communication that nobody had ever had before. And there's just something really important and historic, I think, about what radio means to the world and as a form of communication prior to any other forms of modern communication. And it still exists today, not in such a great capacity, but I think there's still room for it.
100%. I think there's still room for it because obviously when it became TV came along, I'm sure there was obviously scaremongering. Obviously, that's the death of radio and stuff like that. It's always. I don't think it's going away. It's just again another tool, another medium that is quite bespoke. It kind of fits in with your life. And ultimately, radio stations are now digital anyway. So it's the same thing. You don't have the same kind of radio. You can have radio on your phone. And I think if it had to still be a physical radio, I think it would have struggled. But with technology now, the radio stations, they come with you wherever. And people still like that out of the moment, conversation, that live feed. I mean, for me, it's always driving in the car, like dropping my kid off there, back again. That's when the radio is always on, whether it's music, news, or debate. But the world is big enough to have it as well, which I think is fantastic. Also,
well, I think it's more focused towards, like we talk about, and I joke about it all the time, video killed the radio star back in the 80s.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, that's true because that was when much music came online.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it was the music videos, right? And that was sort of what drew away from radio, because the only way to listen to music prior that you didn't have to pay for it was through radio. And then, of course, television came on and brought that. So it ended the necessity to play music all the time, but talk radio never died. No, that was the aspect of it that continued on. And to this day, and what Yachting International Radio does is basically talk radio. It's just we pre-record or go live. It depends, but we are talk radio. And I will get back to the radio portion of things again once I'm back in Canada.
Well, yes. Well, before you go back to Canada, when on earth did you leave? And, how did the yacht, because, you're working in logging and you work in radio. Where the hell did yachts come from?
Well, I did a trip. I was working at radio in Penticton and I booked a month trip through Europe. And it was the first time that I'd been overseas. I mean, I'd been to the States and, like everybody in Canada, but it was the first time that I've been to Europe. And I started off in England and it was too cold and miserable. And then I started the trip through Europe. We took the ferry over to mainland France and then drove through France into Spain and along, into Monaco and all those beautiful places in between. And I really fell in love with the Mediterranean Sea. And at that time, I said to myself, that's it. In 2 years, I'm going to be living in Europe. And not knowing that, in my head, that was sort of, and this just goes to show just how stubbornly stupid I am sometimes. But literally, I went back and I owned a house. I owned a business. I had 2 cars. I mean, I was well established, but it literally was a year almost to the day that I came back from that vacation, that I sold my business, sold my cars, sold my house, gave away most of my furniture, and was on my way to Europe.
Wow. What was it about, where in Europe did you go that rocked your world that much?
Well, it was the Mediterranean Sea. It was the beauty of Europe as a whole. I mean, in Italy, the small little towns and the peaceful and the architecture, the diet, the weather. It was just a different environment because in Canada, we kind of live to survive, right? You go from season, every season has a defined sort of term to it. And you go from season to season and you're just living for the end of that season. There's not really a large sort of cultural aspect to Canada. We are a blended nation of many different nationalities, but there's not that history there.
Yep.
And I think what really amazed me about Europe was, modern day people living in villages that were thousands of years old that have maintained the traditions of those villages that were thousands of years old. And I wanted to experience that. I wanted to experience the food, the life, the wine, just everything about it, the smells, the culture.
Yeah. No, I can understand that. Don't get me wrong, the nature and the scenery in Canada is, breathtaking. It is one of the most gorgeous places on the planet. But I suppose in a way there's no more to it than that. It is immense beauty and everything else. If you're looking for, especially if you're into people, culturally rich definitely is what Europe is. And everything's so close together. You guys in Canada will drive to go shopping for like 8 hours. Like I lived in Calgary and people were going to Edmonton for shopping. And I'm like, how long does it take to drive there? And you're just going to go to the shop. I'm like, I don't understand.
Well, I mean, it's to say, when I was living in the Okanagan Valley, and mind you, something that a lot of people don't understand about Canada is that we are the second largest landmass in the world. And we have very diverse climates. Where I'm moving to is actually like the Hawaii or the Majorca of Canada. We have white sand beaches that go on for miles. We have, we've got scorpions, we've got black-widow spiders. Not that's any like lure, but it is desert country. We grow wine. It's where ice wine came from. It's a beautiful area. So yeah, I think though too that it's like anything. If you're a curious sort of person, where you grew up, you're so used to it, you don't actually see the beauty of it.
Yeah.
So you have to leave in order to appreciate the beauty of what you had. And that's what I've done.
So you're in Europe, what? You're just cruising around vineyards or like eating lots of pasta?
No, well, actually, I met someone and then I got knocked up and they lived in Europe. So I moved to Ibiza.
What? You lived in Ibiza?
Yeah, I lived in Ibiza.
Wow. Gutted to be in Ibiza and pregnant though. That sucks. Like, so obviously you keep you under control, maybe, Rhea.
We've never been. Okay, that's a lie. Yeah, it's okay. See, I'm that old. I forget when I used to party. But yeah, no, thinking back, I did used to be a bit of a party animal. So
You're in Ibiza. It'd be criminal not to. Well, you'd have to have like the discernment of a goddamn nun to not enjoy yourself on that island. That's why I avoided it when in my 20s. There's a whole bunch of my friends that were going. And me and my best friend, we were like, we can't go. We can't. Because we won't come back. Like, we would literally, we knew what we were like at the time. We're like, if we go, we'll end up trying to get jobs and we would just stay. And then I would be one of those leathery women that still lives in Ibiza now, talking about crazy parties that I went to. So yeah, I
think the thing for me though is in Canada, because I grew up in small towns, I'm not big on crowds, right? And I did go to a couple of clubs in Ibiza and I didn't like it. And it's simply because I don't like being packed into any place like a sardine. And it was just loud, overwhelming. I'm used to bush parties. I used to like going out. We had this place back home called Frank's Field and it was in the middle of nowhere. And you would drive in for a good 3 minutes or so. And it was a gravel pit. And we literally, they would have trucks with all the DJ equipment and lights and big, huge bonfire in the middle of the gravel pit. And everybody would meet down there and we'd have about 50 people maybe. And that would be our party, right? So when I went to Ibiza and I experienced that for the first time, it was overwhelming for me. I mean, it's still at heart, even though I've traveled around the world, I'm still a country girl. I'm still a small town girl. And that kind of thing doesn't appeal to me. I'd rather have more one-on-one or smaller, more intimate gatherings than the craziness that goes on in Ibiza.
So when did you hop over to Mallorca? Like, when was that transition?
Well, after about a year of being in Ibiza and Ibiza town flooding, as it did every year, according to the locals, I decided, and I have a 10-year-old daughter with me because I moved with my 10-year-old daughter and I was pregnant. And so I just thought, no, we've got to go where it's more family friendly. They only had one English school on the island at the time as well. And it was paparazzi in the parking lot every time you took your kid to school. And it just wasn't, and these kids were exposed to like, here's my 10-year-old daughter coming from Canada. And Canadian kids are really innocent, right? I mean, they're just really innocent. And if you thinking kids aren't, trust me, no, that. So, these were kids of like famous DJs and stuff, right? So their parents were out partying until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, dropping them off school, higher than a kite, still pissed, going to the local bar, getting more pissed, doing more cocaine, and then picking them up after school. That was the kind of life that they were leading. Like, these kids were having sex at 11 and going drugs. And I was like, this is not, no, I like my innocent little 10-year-old Canadian kid. So we came to Mallorca, I think Easter that year, and I really fell in love with Mallorca because it was still that sort of small island appeal, small town appeal, but there was so many more options. And so, yeah, found a house in the middle of the island and moved into a tiny little Mallorquin village.
No.
Just after that.
It is a special place. I've said it many times. The island it's just got a really nice vibe about it. I mean, I know they don't want us to be there anymore. Like, constantly, our press is like, they've had enough. But that's more about it, like everywhere, the commercial properties, people doing Airbnbs and stuff like that. It really does. The first time I ever knew that was a thing was actually when I was on board in Barcelona, and Barceloneta had a lot of protests because obviously they did up all the marina, so it looks lovely and it's really close to the beach. But obviously there's a community of people that have lived there all their lives. Their kids have grown up there, and they've all been there, when it was fishing predominantly, and they're literally being priced out of the market. So they were kicking off about it. And obviously recently Mallorca's doing the same, I guess.
I completely understand them because, there's families that have been here for generation upon generation, and they're losing their culture because of corporations and their language. And I think is a travesty. I mean, what makes Mallorca so beautiful, not that many of the Brits or Germans that come here ever realize it, but what makes Mallorca beautiful is that rich cultural history. I mean, Mallorca is situated the mouth of the Mediterranean Sea. It has been taken over by many different cultures over the years because it was a strategic point of, for any armed forces, right? Yeah. In any war, this was a very strategic place. And you see bits of that history all over the island. And to be inundated with a bunch of people that just want to get drunk and leave their trash on the beach and drive up house prices so that they can no longer live here. Yeah. I see where they're getting pissed.
Yeah. It's all over, isn't it? Obviously, again, it's changing people's habits. So you fell in love with the island. You've got 2 kids. So what was your idea when you got to, Mallorca? Were you going to work in media or try to get into media and go back to it? Or were you
no, because I got pregnant again.
You were on it, literally.
I know, right? So I had my 3rd child, and he was really ill. He was born 2 months premature. He had 2 holes in his heart. So I spent 5 years really sort of in and out of the hospitals on a continuous basis. He took 14 different kinds of medication every day, and it was every 2 hours. So a lot of time of not sleeping. And when he was 5, he had open heart surgery, and that fixed the holes in his heart. And our lives really sort of changed after that. So I did have the freedom to, sort of reimagine what I was going to be and where I was going to go. And so I started working for a local radio station here, which is German owned. And Germans do things differently than Canadians. I think Germans do things differently than the world. It was weird. Lovely people, don't get me wrong, but definitely just not the way that I was used to anything. And then I started helping Lars Molen with his Facebook groups in yachting. And of course, being English speaking, the minute you move to Mallorca, the only people you're going to meet are yachting, right? So that was sort of my first opening. Those were the people that I met. And so I started helping Lars with his Facebook pages. And then I started doing some social media marketing for different companies that I knew, different yachting companies that I knew. And then I started working for the first radio station that started in the yachting space. And then I quit after a year and a half. I quit after a year and started at Yachting International Radio.
What was the drive to start your own?
Well, I realized that I'd been, since the age of 22 or so, I'd been in radio myself. And I saw that it could work in this space, but it had to be done by somebody who understood radio, not somebody who thought if we build it, they will come and we'll become instant millionaires, because that's not the way any business works. You got to put in the time and the effort. You got to know what you're doing. You have to have some education of what it is that you're doing. If you have to hire, none of us are perfect at everything. Even in my business today, I have to hire things out because there's certain things I'm good at and certain things I'm not. And I'm smart enough to understand what I'm good at. And unfortunately, for them, everything had to be hired out because they didn't know anything about the business. They knew yachting, but nothing about the business. And I always say, if you're in media, you can apply your skills to any business on the face of the planet. Any business. But as long as it's in radio, right? It's like, a captain, he's not going to come on land and decide he's going to be a media mogul. It's likewise. I mean, you can't do that. And a captain, he can captain any boat, depending on what his ticket says. he's got the experience and he can do it in any form of maritime. But that was sort of, I just thought, well, I love what I do. I've always loved radio. I've always loved the spoken word. So let's just set it up on your own.
It's quite amazing when you think about it. And especially in this day and age, you get it a lot with marketing, like individuals, thinking that especially social media marketing, they assume that they can do it just because you're on, because you use Instagram, you now understand what marketing is. There is still a reason why people do marketing degrees, because there is a science behind it, and it's like anything, like I completely agree with what you say about it. You could know the yachting industry, but there is skill in producing a radio show. It's not, there is other things that you need to consider. And if you don't understand that, it's not going to be effective. And
it's even down to choosing a voice. I think a lot of people don't understand that just because you want to do it doesn't mean you're going to make your podcast. You've got to have the right voice. It can't be a squeaky, you may be cute as hell, but once you put that at the podcast format, no one's going to see what you look like. All they're going to hear is that annoying, really annoying Minnie Mouse voice. And they're going to want to chuck their phone out the window, right? Like, I'm sorry, sweetheart. There's nothing you can do about your voice. Unless, of course, you take your entire script and make it an AI voice, which is possible nowadays. But it doesn't have the same cadence. It's not as honest and as real. And I think we've gotten to a stage now with AI that people want honest and real. They've seen enough AI. They've heard enough AI. And they want reality. They want to know what other people are thinking, what other people are doing, and how other people are doing what they do.
So let's go back to the beginning of obviously you want to do your own radio station. You've decided to do it. What was your mission? What did Yachting International Radio, you wanted to use it to do what?
Well, I built Yachting International Radio on 4 pillars, because anything that you build has to have a very strong foundation, and the strongest foundations are built on 4 pillars. And that was diversity, equality, mental health, and sustainability. 4 things, because I have 3 children and now 2 grandchildren. At that time, I just had the 3 children. But I really wanted to build something that would spread that message sort of as wide as possible to make change. And that's why I built it, because I felt that in modern media today, everything is leading a certain way. I mean, if you listen to one media source, it's going to be right-leaning, or you're going to listen to another media source, it's going to be left-leaning, or, these huge corporations that have so much money that they can afford to make an entire segment of a population believe in one thing, because they've got that kind of money to do that, and because they're pushing what their political beliefs are. And I firmly come from the idea of way before all of this, because the radio station that I worked at was independently owned, because there still were a few left at that time, half a century ago. Not that long. 35 years, so almost. But I wanted to bring back the type of reporting that was just honest, straightforward. I have some of the hosts that come on board Yachting International Radio that I can't even listen to some of their stuff. Honestly, because I'm like, oh, shut. It just, the way they think, I don't get. But it's not my right to tell them that they can't be there. They do have a message, and it's an important message. And ultimately, I need to sit back and say, okay, are they being abusive? The things that you really have to be careful about, are they lying? First off, is what they're spreading out there, is it hate? Is it, about abusing people? Is it hurting people? Is it lying? And if that's not the case, then everybody has a right to have a voice. And each one of them brings something special to the table. And so you have to support that. If you want to be bipartisan in media, then you can't shut down people just for having their own opinion.
Also, if you are a true journalist, you have to give both sides, and that's, if in the UK, we've come across this recently, and a lot of the populist stuff that's going on in the world, and, the push to the right in certain countries, which aren't necessarily completely right wing, but if media silences the right of the conversation, then they get more desperate. And then if you've shut down the debate, there's no way for them to kind of thrash it out and work out who's got the better idea of whatever. You can't just shut down one side because it doesn't feel real. It doesn't legitimize the left side of things either, because you've got, you're cancelling the argument. I think a lot of problems with the societies all over at the moment is because for some reason, some media is scared to actually just be honest and open about both sides of the argument. They are really paranoid about opening it up and giving a voice to certain individuals like you said, you might not agree with on 99% of the stuff, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't have a right to actually say what they're saying. And
and I think you bring it back to the mainstream and the fact that there's no room for hate in media. I'm sorry, there isn't. And that's all we see. I work on social media every single day because of my business. And I mean, since the pandemic, the amount of hate that is coming in my face, like consistently, it's almost like a dam burst. And it's just constant hate. And that isn't good for anybody's mental health, mine alone. I mean, people talking about racism and being blatantly racist, blatantly sexist, blatantly, no one's afraid to hide the ugly side of their nature anymore. And I put that blame squarely on the feet of media today.
Yeah. I think, it is crazy what's going on. So to create something, to create a platform and then stay true to it, I think is probably the hardest thing. And obviously working in the yachting sphere, has it been difficult, not to kind of sell out and just do glossy stuff and ignore certain stories, in the time that you've created it?
It's not in my nature. I've never taken the easy path. I've always taken the road less traveled. And I've always probably made it more difficult for myself than I really should have. But from day one, I'm very principled. I set up Yachting International Radio for a reason. And I don't think maybe there was a time where I couldn't pay my rent at one stage where I thought, what am I doing? Am I crazy? But then I looked around and I thought, oh my God, it's like the Bobbsey twins everywhere. I mean, there wasn't a form of media that didn't literally almost a carbon copy of each other. And I thought, no, I've got to continue this because I set out with a mission, something that, was in my head when I was a kid, something that I always believed in. And, you stay true to yourself, you stay true to your ethics, and eventually, the cream rises to the top.
Yeah, well, slowly. So when you started, what was, Yachting International, what was the format of it? And then where are we today? Because it has shifted, obviously rightly so, because lots of things have shifted in introducing new media. But like in the beginning, how was it? How did it work?
In the beginning, I didn't even know how to use Instagram. I wasn't on Twitter. I wasn't on Instagram. I'd never been on Instagram. And I started it off as online radio. And I quickly realized after, it's got to be live radio. Like you can't have a radio station without having 24-hour live DJs. And I was only one person. And so I think probably about a month or two in, I realized that what I needed to do was start putting everything out video and on social media. And I just started curating hosts. I think one of the first people that I found was Cherise Reedman from the Crew Coach. And because she was licensed. And that's another thing for me is that, anything that comes on my platforms, if they're going to be hosted and they've got a certain topic, they've got to have qualifications to be there. Because I don't want just anybody talking about mental health. It's like the same on land. If you're going to go down to the local, we're not going to go down to the local corner store and ask the corner store shop guy to help us with our mental health. Right? Like, I mean, it's the same. I don't care what industry you're in. If you're at sea, if you're on land. So Cherise Reedman was the first person that came on board and she was licensed. And so it just sort of evolved from there. And I think now I've got, within the next week, I'll have 23 hosts. But I realized that I needed to take it from just radio and take it over to social media. So that's when I started signing up for the Twitters and to Instagram and started up my YouTube channel and started pushing it out across all the different platforms because I had to reach everybody.
But social media is different to news as well, isn't it?
Yes.
So that's an education in itself, like what goes on social media isn't news.
No, social media is really opinions, but the way I see it is that we aren't in a world where people are going to come to you. You've got to go to where they are. And when you look at demographics, there are specific demographics for every single one of the social media users. The Instagram people aren't on YouTube. The LinkedIn people aren't on Instagram. Facebook and LinkedIn, possibly. But, everybody has their favorite form of social media. They may browse the others occasionally, but they really do stick to the one. And podcast is podcast. I mean, as long as and even on podcast, you have to make sure that your podcast provider is distributing that to everybody's favorite podcast app, because there are, at least 20 that I know of. There's Spotify, there's Apple Podcasts, there's, Hulu, there's a whole, so you've got to make sure that you go to the people. You can't expect them to come to you. So I think that was one of the biggest growth periods for me, was understanding that, not only did I have to do the work of one person, but I had to do the work of a team. Essentially.
And raise 3 children at the same time.
Yes. Well, by that point, actually, my oldest had moved out. She was already in her 20s. So
a little bit of leeway then. Not much, but a little bit. So how it started out is not how it is now. What do you think the main, obviously myself, I've created a podcast because of Pearls of Wisdom. What do you think podcasts bring now that the other, obviously you take live radio, social media and all of that kind of stuff. What do podcasts bring that the others don't, and why there's now, a deluge of different podcasts happening?
Well, but 2 years ago, they were saying, all the research that you would do was saying podcasts were the fastest growing form of marketing in the world. And, thankfully, I was smart enough to start it up, what I started up in 2019. I'm not sure it was smart enough or it was just dumb luck, but let's go with smart enough. It makes me sound better. But I think because we are seeing a world that is getting busier and busier, more people are hustling more and more. It's almost like people are reaching out for more stimulation all the time. And podcasts offer that. And they offer it no matter where you are. Whether you be in your car, you can be listening to a podcast while you drive. Whether you be doing your morning run, you can be listening to a podcast while you run. Whether you're doing your workout. The same thing if you're on a plane, if you're on a bus, if you're on a train. All of these things, you can be listening to podcasts. It's not so easy on a run to be watching a video, right? Obviously. You can't be watching a video while you're driving. Obviously. So I think that's why it's been more a matter of convenience. People still want all that information and they want the knowledge, but it's how you deliver that information and knowledge to them that has changed. And statistics show it's going to continue to blow up for years to come.
I think it is, for me, like obviously creating this podcast, it was never first of all, it wasn't my idea, but what I think the benefit, obviously, with all the different things that we've wanted to cover, it does create a different kind of space. Having a conversation about a topic is very different to, creating marketing, educational material and everything else. It creates an opportunity for another level of understanding about that topic or behavior or whatever, which is very unique. And it's not really surprising that it has blown up. But when it comes to yachting podcasts, do you see it having a positive influence on the industry?
I think so, because the conversations that are being had are probably the first time those conversations have ever been had. You know, you see a lot of these glossy magazines out there. They really want to be, it's like, I don't know, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig, right? But you see these people, you know, a lot of these yachting publications have become basically the equivalent of the used car sales guides that we saw back in the 1980s. You know, it's like glossy pictures of yachts, one after the other, advertisements, and then a really well edited story. And so now we're seeing that backlash with sites like Yachty's Name, Shame, and Fame, and, you know, people suing people and people being found out for being, you know, predators in the industry. It's because nobody talked about this stuff. And I think finally, you know, those topics are being raised, but it's only because, you know, people like you, people like Ian from Yachts Mermaids, were able to start talking about it, open the conversation, you know, Kareen talking about mental health. I think that it really has created the change that we see today, because those glossy magazines, only in the past few years, now they're starting to talk about it because they're not afraid of losing their clients as a result, because they've seen it's been accepted.
Well, the thing is with it, you see, like I got a friend of mine who's a writer, and it's really tough for professional writers in general at the moment. But podcasts, you know, liability and stuff like that, I think the legal system hasn't really caught up. So where magazines are super cautious about what they publish, because obviously the law is very clear, and especially there are clear lines to sue for defamation and stuff like that. I think social media, and especially podcasts, because they're brand new, I don't necessarily think that people are as cautious when talking about certain things as well.
Actually, the law applies. I'm not sure about England, but in Canada, if you're a journalist, the law applies no matter what form of journalism you take. So it could be podcasts, it could be written, it could be TV. The fact is, there is a law that applies to that. And you can be sued. I mean, people are being sued for financial advice, for example, in the UK and the US, while not being qualified to give that financial advice. Yeah. And there's been some class action lawsuits as a result. So, you know, the laws are there, they're in place. I think the issue is that not a lot of people realize that those laws do apply to their podcasts. And likewise, the people that feel that they have a case for libel, they're not aware that they can actually go to court and sue for.
It's also the funding. Most of the time, when you're going into actions like that, you've got to be over quite a wealthy individual or corporation to actually do it in the first place, because it's an expensive endeavor, and the average person is not going to be able to afford to do that. So it's changed. It's morphed into, like you said, you've got basically an army of individuals talking about different topics that, you know, involve the yachting industry. Where do you see it going next?
Well, I'm bringing on 3 new podcasts in the next few months. So we're going to continue to branch out the same way that we have. And there is no limit to how many podcasts we can have. But my next step is that I am moving home to Canada, and I will be setting up a studio, and I'm going to bring back the radio portion that I got rid of, for the simple fact that I was just only one person. So my ultimate goal is to, once I move home to Canada, to have 24-hour DJs live. So we air the podcast. We also have DJs as well, and truly make a space for the yachting industry, whether you be on watch and you want to listen to music, or you want to, you know, place a call in and ask for music, or you want to, whatever, to have somebody, the way radio was supposed to be, to have somebody sort of on the other end, and somebody to keep you company when you want somebody to keep you company and there's no one around.
That's quite cool. That is quite cool. I expect to be invited as a guest, though. First. I expect to be first. So that's exciting. You are on your way back. You know, what are you excited about going back? What spurred the move anyway? You know, it's you've had a long, my mother, your life on the island. It is beautiful, but obviously it's a big decision to go back.
2 of my children have already moved back, and my mother is elderly, and she's sort of at the stage now where I need to go back and help look after her. Well, look after her. Nobody's helping me. It'll be me looking after her. And my eldest daughter has given birth to 2 daughters. So I need to move back and be grandma, be the matriarch of the family, as it were, and take care of everybody and look after everybody. So that is the main goal. I have my son here. The reason I'm still here now is my son is finishing school in a couple of weeks. And so it will be us going home, really. And that's what spurred the idea of going back. I could stay here forever. I could. I don't like cold. I don't like winter. I think snow has a place, and it's on a mountain when I've got skis strapped to my feet. And that's the only place that has a place. But, I think, I'm not sure about men necessarily, but I know definitely women, we tend to go where we need to go.
Yep, it is one of those things. Obviously, I've traveled a lot myself, and I've gone to some really cool places. But my home or the UK was never terrible enough to not go back. Because I always said if I was an orphan, I would have stayed probably in New Zealand. That was kind of like, if I was going to be selfish and it would be that there, probably, or Canada, to be honest. I had a fantastic time in Calgary and being that close to Banff and stuff like that. But it's family. And obviously, as you get older with your children and stuff like that, becomes more and more important. And I know you keep saying that you're going to look after everybody, but they will get the opportunity to look after you. And I think that's also important because, you have been on.
You haven't met my kids.
I'm sure they will. I am sure they will.
It's my own fault. I raised them that way. So I gave them everything. Literally, I work. My existence is for my children now. So I'm getting that. Although I have to say, my son, he's turning into a right little gentleman. So I love my daughters, but they're very self-centered, which hopefully will change in 20 years. We'll see.
So it says the woman that packed her bags left Canada to go off traveling. I don't know where they got it from. I'm sure they didn't get it from you.
I wasn't self-centered. I do like travel.
Well, exciting times for you then on the horizon, basically. Just a lot of, graft, I would say, in some respect, but we will always, I'm excited for your next chapter, I have to say. Obviously, having spoken to you and known you for a long time, having a solid base and knowing that you're going to be there, to set up a proper studio and have those new projects and opportunities, I think is going to be fantastic. And
I'm excited too that my son, for example, he is going to be 17 in August. And we're training him over the summer to do the editing.
Coming into the family is.
Exactly. And my daughter, once her children are in school, you say 5 years from now, she is going to be taking over, more the sales side of things. And my other daughter is extremely artistic, and I'm hoping that she will take over the creative side of things. So, it's a family business. And I hope that even after I get hit by a bus, that they will take it over and carry on, sort of what I envision this to be ultimately.
I'm sure they will. I don't think you're not going to get hit by a bus. You're going to be around for a very long time. You don't get to check out early. You've got work to do. It's true. Just be one of those characters. Unfortunately, you're too important. It's been lovely talking to you and hearing your story. Having known you for quite some time, I've learned something new about you today that I didn't know. And like I said, I'm genuinely super excited about the next stage in your journey. And we've got a few projects that we're working on together that will be coming to fruition. So you will always obviously have a voice in the Mediterranean, and I should always be flying your flag as well, even though you're not here.
Well, I have to say though, it sounds like YR is a one-woman operation, and if that had been the case, we wouldn't have made it past the first year. And I have to say, I am incredibly grateful for so many of the hosts that came on board when we were just a fledgling little company that was sort of trying to beat up with the big guys. And they believed in my mission, and they believed in my vision. And it's people like you and people like Corrine and Marion and, the Yachting USA, Yachting Canada, Bro Talk, all of these amazing hosts, Self-Care, that really created what Yachting International Radio is today. Because, Yeah, and I think that's something that people don't realize about YR is that we operate as a co-op. It's everybody, it's like a profit share, essentially. When you sponsor a podcast, everybody gets a share of that money. And I think that's so exciting because in a world where we're so busy trying to fight each other to get our little, portion of the pie, we've all come together to say, you know what? Let's become successful together. And that's special and is very unique, especially in this industry. So I need to say thank you to you and to every single other one of the hosts out there as well for seeing what I saw and seeing what could be possible.
No, I had to start with someone, and it kind of really started with you. So, I probably wouldn't be sat here doing this if it wasn't for you either. So, like you said, it's all, we're a big YR family. Dysfunctional, a bit weird, but we work.
Really dysfunctional and really weird. That's a given. When your foundation is built on someone as strange as I am, it's bound to be weird. But you know what? I think that's what makes it fun. That's what makes it exciting. And I think that's what makes it different. We're not a cookie cutter because I'm weird. It's good.
Well, and also, like we said in the beginning, the cookie cutter stuff had been given a lot of time. Like, that's all it was, And there are still people out there at this moment in time that are just trying to do the glossy, just trying to, just what they don't talk about anything at all, which, is fine. I suppose marketing has its place to some degree, but I like to talk about something that mean something or could work or could change something. Time is precious from my perspective, but I do a nice yacht interior, and it's quite nice to see some nice flowers and somebody drinking some orange.
You know what I would like? I would really like to see a drunken podcast in the islands.
Well, I would be super keen to do that, but I don't know where we are.
Wouldn't that be amazing though? You invite people to the drunken podcast and you just get people drunk and you interview people. I think that would be the most hilarious thing. The drunken podcast.
I think I would call it the French Water podcast. So my favorite French water, that pink stuff, it just makes it all come out.
The things that can you imagine the next day? And you'd have to make everything.
Yeah, just knew would probably be like,
I could guarantee you would have a ton of people show up because it's free booze.
But yeah, thank you for coming on and being a guest. It's a bit weird because obviously I've been on yours, but you've never been on mine. So it's quite nice to delve into the Rhea and what makes you tick. And I honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I wish you all the best with your move. I've moved a lot in my time. It's stressful, but you're going to where it's meant to be. So, it's going to be great. It's going to be great.
It will be. If I can find a home. I might be coming to you live from the local Timmy's in Penticton, BC, and sleeping on a local park bench, but it'll be live. It'll be still there.
Wow. I have, obviously, I follow the news. I know it's quite intense out there for accommodation, but this is the problem where you invite so many people in and there's nowhere for them to stay. We've got an issue with that ourselves. Come on over. We've got nowhere for you to stay, but, whatevs. That's a story for another day. Thank you so much for being on, Rhea, and bringing your story to our listeners. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Superyacht Laundry, I suggest you go and find the other million episodes that we've got. We've got quite a few, a big collection nowadays, so there will be others that you will enjoy. We will be releasing more, so till the next time, see you later.